They said the table was for family. Not my family, just the kind that comes with money, matching watches, and silence bought with fear. When my husband leaned close in court and told me I'd never touch his money again, he thought the story was already over. He thought I was still the quiet wife who asked permission, who smiled through humiliation, who didn't understand the numbers behind his success. What he didn't know was that I'd been listening for years. What he didn't know was that the envelope under my hand held more than paperwork, it held the truth. The kind that doesn't just embarrass powerful men. It dismantles them. My name is Jennifer White, and this is how I stopped being invisible, exposed an empire built on lies, and learned that silence, when used right, is the sharpest weapon of all. From the outside, my life looked like something people whispered about with envy. A big white house overlooking the Cumberland River. Charity galas with crystal glasses and silent auctions. A husband whose name opened doors and whose handshake closed deals. Grant White was admired in Nashville, real estate, philanthropy, power. And I was Jennifer White, his wife, the woman everyone assumed had won some invisible lottery. For a long time, I let myself believe it too. I had once been someone before the last name. I taught marketing at the university, loved the rhythm of classrooms, the way students leaned forward when an idea finally clicked. Grant used to praise that part of me. He said my mind was sharp, that my insight helped him see opportunities others missed. Back then, we were partners, or at least I thought we were. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with suggestions. Why stress yourself when I can provide? You've earned a break. When I stepped away from teaching, it felt temporary, like pausing a song I'd return to later. But the pause stretched. My paycheck disappeared into joint accounts I no longer controlled. Credit cards came with limits and questions. Spending required explanations. Grant never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Control doesn't always sound like anger. Sometimes it sounds like reason. His mother, Lydia, perfected that tone. She ran the White Hope Foundation and spoke in polished sentences about legacy and image. You're part of something bigger now, she'd tell me, smiling kindly while correcting how I dressed, how I spoke, how much space I took up in a room. According to her, sacrifice was love, and silence was loyalty. I learned quickly how to be agreeable. How to nod. How to disappear just enough to keep the peace. At dinners, Grant talked business while I refilled glasses. At events, I stood half a step behind him, introduced as my wife, like an accessory that came with the suit. People praised my luck. No one asked if I was happy. The house itself felt staged. Every room immaculate, nothing out of place. A home designed to impress, not to live in. Even my office, once filled with books and notes, slowly emptied. One shelf at a time, my old life packed away under the excuse of decluttering. I told myself this was marriage. Compromise. Seasons. But something in me stayed awake. It was in the small humiliations that truth crept in. Being asked why I needed new shoes. Being reminded that Grant paid for everything. Being thanked publicly for supporting his work when I knew how many strategies had started as conversations at our kitchen table. The worst part wasn't the loss of money or career. It was the erosion of certainty. I began questioning my own instincts, my own memory. When you're told often enough that you don't understand, you start to believe it. Still, I smiled. I played my role well. I was polished, gracious, invisible. And from the outside, the picture stayed perfect. What no one saw was that perfection had a cost. It demanded obedience. It required me to shrink, slowly and quietly, until the woman I used to be felt like a rumor. I didn't yet know how the story would end. I only knew this: a life that looks flawless can still be a cage. And cages, no matter how elegant, always leave marks on the ones inside. The moment everything shifted didn't come with shouting or tears. It arrived quietly, disguised as celebration. My birthday. Lydia insisted on hosting a dinner at the house, complete with catered food and a guest list that read like a donor roll. Everyone hugged me, praised the evening, commented on how lucky I was to be surrounded by such generosity. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. When it came time for gifts, Lydia handed me a small envelope. Inside was a store gift card, presented with a soft laugh and a line about practical things being the best. I thanked her, because that's what I'd learned to do. Gratitude had become second nature. Minutes later, I watched her clasp a diamond bracelet around Grant's assistant's wrist. Claire flushed with pleasure. Grant's eyes lingered a second too long. The room felt suddenly too warm. It wasn't jealousy that hit me. It was clarity. The mirror across the dining room reflected the four of us. Lydia glowing with pride. Grant relaxed and confident. Claire radiant, claimed. And me, standing there holding something small and disposable, as if it were a lesson I was meant to absorb. That night, I lay awake replaying details I'd ignored for years. Claire's constant presence. The way Grant guarded his phone. The sudden shifts in affection that had nothing to do with me. It wasn't betrayal that stung the most, it was replacement. I had been phased out of my own life. The next morning, I found the papers by accident. A neat stack on the dining table, left behind after Grant rushed out early. The top sheet was a bank statement. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but one number caught my attention. A 6-figure transfer to an unfamiliar holding company. When I asked about it later, Grant barely looked up from his phone. "It's an investment," he said. "You wouldn't understand the structure." The words landed heavier than he intended. Or maybe exactly as he intended. That afternoon, while the house sat quiet, I took photos of every page. Not out of suspicion, I told myself. Out of habit. Old instincts don't disappear. They just wait. I compared the name on the statement to public records online. My stomach tightened when I saw Lydia's signature listed as an approver under the foundation's filings. That wasn't normal. That wasn't clean. Later, scrolling through Grant's laptop while he showered, I found an email draft he'd forgotten to delete. Short. Casual. Devastating. A confirmation about a transfer and a plan for the next one. It wasn't just money. It was coordination. I closed the laptop and went to the bathroom mirror. I expected to see anger, maybe grief. Instead, I saw focus. A woman waking up. For years, I'd been told I didn't need to know. That knowledge was a burden Grant carried for both of us. Standing there, I realized how carefully that belief had been planted. The illusion cracked that day, not because of betrayal, but because I finally saw the pattern. Control wrapped in courtesy. Lies dressed as protection. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I did something far more dangerous. I started paying attention. Once suspicion takes root, it grows fast. Every casual comment, every closed door, every unexplained absence starts to carry weight. I moved through the house differently after that birthday, quieter, more observant, like a guest instead of a wife. Grant mistook my silence for surrender. That was his first mistake. I began with what I knew best. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. Late at night, after Grant fell asleep, I opened old backups on my laptop, files from the years I'd helped him polish presentations, manage donor lists, review budgets he claimed were just drafts. I told myself it was curiosity. The truth was simpler. I trusted my instincts again. The transfers followed a rhythm. Same amounts, same intervals, different company names. Each shell looked clean on the surface, but they all pointed in the same direction. Offshore accounts. Short-term property flips. Cash-only transactions that bypassed scrutiny. I cross-checked everything with publicly available records. Corporate registrations. Foundation disclosures. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't aggressive investing. It was laundering. The foundation was the key. Donations flowed in, praised as generosity. Then they flowed out, quietly redirected through holding companies with innocent-sounding names. The money reappeared as private real estate purchases and consulting fees. A perfect loop. Lydia's name appeared more than once. Always as oversight. Always just far enough removed to claim ignorance if things went wrong. I documented everything. Photos. Spreadsheets. Timelines. I stored copies in places Grant would never think to look. Old cloud accounts. Encrypted drives labeled with boring names. Each file felt like a brick in a wall I was building around the truth. Fear hovered at the edges, but it never stopped me. In a strange way, the work steadied me. Every confirmed suspicion replaced doubt with certainty. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I had been managed. One afternoon, I followed a transaction trail that led to a company registered under a generic address. When I checked the legal representative, my hands went cold. Grant's name. Not hidden. Not masked. Arrogant in its simplicity. He never thought I'd look. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the glow of the river reflecting off the windows. The life I'd admired from the inside now looked different. Less like success. More like a carefully staged illusion. I realized then that this wasn't about catching him cheating or winning a divorce. This was bigger. People trusted the foundation. Employees depended on those investments. The lie had reach. The weight of it pressed down on me. Knowledge is powerful, but it's also isolating. I couldn't tell friends. I couldn't confront Grant. I couldn't even hint at what I knew without risking everything. So I did what I'd been trained to do long before I became Mrs. White. I gathered evidence. I waited. And I planned. By the time I closed my laptop, dawn was creeping over the water. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. Grant believed I didn't understand the rules. What he didn't realize was that I'd spent my entire career teaching people how systems work, and how to expose the ones designed to exploit trust. The numbers had spoken. And they were on my side. Knowing the truth is one thing. Deciding what to do with it is another. For 3 days after I finished mapping the transactions, I barely slept. I moved through the house like a ghost, answering Grant in half sentences, nodding when Lydia called to check in. Every word out of my mouth felt like a performance. I was buying time, and time was suddenly the most dangerous currency I had. I needed confirmation, real confirmation, from someone who didn't love Grant, didn't fear Lydia, and didn't benefit from the white name. Someone who could tell me whether what I'd found was as serious as it looked. There was only one person I trusted enough for that. Marlon Pierce had been one of my best students years ago. Brilliant with data, allergic to shortcuts, the kind of mind that saw patterns where others saw noise. After graduation, he'd gone into financial crimes. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I emailed him and asked if he could look at something hypothetical, he replied within 10 minutes. We met in his office downtown, a plain building that smelled faintly of old coffee and printer toner. No elegance. No pretense. I handed him my phone without explanation. He scrolled in silence, his expression tightening with every swipe. Finally, he looked up. "Jennifer," he said carefully, "this isn't creative accounting. This is federal." The word landed like a dropped plate. Federal. He explained it slowly, clinically. The shell companies. The foundation misuse. The property flips. The coordination. If I'd stumbled onto it, others eventually would too, but not before a lot of damage was done. "You have 2 options," he said. You walk away, pretend you never saw this, and hope you're not implicated when it blows up. Or you cooperate. Fully. Cooperate meant exposure. Surveillance. Silence under pressure. Living inside a lie while dismantling another one. It meant risking retaliation from people who had money, influence, and no hesitation about protecting themselves. I thought about my son. About the way Grant spoke to him lately, sharp and impatient. About the example being set, the kind of power that teaches you rules don't apply if you're rich enough. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I'm doing it because someone has to stop him. Marlon nodded once. Then you'll need protection. The meeting with federal prosecutors happened 2 days later in a nondescript office that felt deliberately forgettable. Fluorescent lights. Neutral walls. A woman named Sarah Chin led the conversation, her questions precise, her tone calm. She didn't flatter me or threaten me. She laid out facts. If I cooperated, I'd receive immunity for anything I'd unknowingly benefited from. If I didn't, and the investigation moved forward without me, I could lose everything anyway. I signed the agreement with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. The moment it touched paper, my old life ended. There was no going back to ignorance. They gave me a recording device disguised as something ordinary. Told me when to use it. When not to. What to say if I felt unsafe. They stressed one rule above all others. Tell no one. When I returned home that evening, Grant was waiting in the kitchen. He watched my face too closely, like he sensed something had shifted. Where were you? He asked. I smiled, just enough. Catching up with an old friend. He kissed my cheek, lingering. You don't need to worry about anything, he said. I take care of us. I met his eyes and nodded. Inside, my heart was racing, not with fear, but with certainty. I had chosen a side. The moment I agreed to cooperate, my home stopped being a sanctuary and turned into a stage. Every room felt wired, every conversation layered with meaning. I woke each morning reminding myself who I was supposed to be, the anxious, compliant wife who depended on Grant for everything. He expected fragility. I gave him just enough. I cried more. At least, I let him see me cry. I asked nervous questions about money, about the future, about whether he was sure the divorce was necessary. Each performance lowered his guard. He mistook fear for weakness, never realizing fear was the mask I wore best. The recording device became part of my routine. I learned when to activate it without thinking, how to set it down naturally, how to breathe evenly while he talked. Grant liked to talk when he thought he was in control. On the phone with Lydia, with Claire, with partners who trusted his discretion. I captured it all. At night, I transferred files onto encrypted drives hidden inside ordinary objects. A book hollowed out on a shelf. A USB taped beneath a kitchen drawer. Every Thursday, an agent retrieved the evidence through a routine that looked like nothing at all. A water bottle left behind. A bag exchanged. Ordinary moments carrying extraordinary risk. Grant began tightening the walls. Passwords changed. Staff replaced. His questions sharpened. Once, I noticed a small red light blinking on his watch and understood immediately, he was recording too. Testing me. I didn't confront him. I adjusted. Lydia visited often, her concern dripping with authority. She reminded me of appearances, of loyalty, of how easily people like us could be misunderstood. She talked about sacrifice as if it were a family heirloom. I listened, nodding, cataloging every word. The hardest part was my son. Protecting him without telling him the truth felt like betrayal of a different kind. He noticed the tension. He asked questions. I answered carefully, teaching him without explaining. When people are afraid of the truth, I told him once, they build stories to hide behind. Some nights, after everyone slept, I sat alone in the dark and let the fear catch up with me. Not fear of Grant, but fear of failing. Of missing something. Of underestimating people who had spent decades manipulating systems to their advantage. Still, I didn't stop. Because every day I stayed silent was another day the evidence grew stronger. And every lie I told him bought me time. By the end of the 5th week, the house felt smaller. The air heavier. Grant watched me too closely now. But by then, it didn't matter. The trap was already set. Arrogance always leaves fingerprints. It started with a mistake so small it almost felt intentional. An email sent to the wrong address. 3 letters instead of 2. Inside was an attachment, a full transfer schedule, every hidden account mapped neatly in columns. It was the kind of document Grant would never imagine falling into my hands. I forwarded it immediately. From that moment on, the pressure escalated. Claire avoided eye contact. Lydia's voice carried through closed doors, sharp and urgent. Grant stopped pretending everything was fine. He began testing me, probing for cracks. At a dinner he hosted for investors, he leaned close and whispered, "I want to see how long you can keep pretending." His smile never faltered. Neither did mine. The FBI moved quietly, building warrants, coordinating with prosecutors. I received fewer updates, which I knew meant they had enough. Silence from them was progress. Lydia hosted a reconciliation party, her idea of control through spectacle. Wine flowed. Apologies were staged. In a quiet hallway, I heard her say, "If she opens her mouth, I'll handle it." I recorded every word. That night, I received a single message from my contact. Arrest set for court date. The courtroom was meant to be my end. A divorce hearing designed to strip me of dignity and resources. Grant's lawyers spoke confidently, painting me as dependent, emotional, entitled. Lydia sat like royalty. Claire looked untouchable. Then my attorney stood. The envelope hit the judge's desk like punctuation. Federal documentation. Verified cooperation. Warrants already signed. The room changed instantly. Agents entered. Reporters leaned forward. Grant's composure shattered in seconds. When he lunged toward me, fury replacing charm, I met his eyes calmly. "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I stopped letting you write my story." Cameras flashed as handcuffs clicked shut. Justice, I learned that day, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. And then it walks in quietly and ends everything. The courtroom was full long before the judge took her seat. Reporters lined the back wall, their quiet murmurs filling the space with a nervous energy that buzzed under my skin. Every polished face in the gallery represented someone who had once toasted Grant's success, donated to his foundation, or benefited from standing close to his power. Today, they were here to watch me lose. At least, that's what they thought. Grant sat across from me in a tailored suit, posture loose, confidence radiating from him like cologne. He glanced my way only once, lips curling into a familiar smirk. It was the same expression he wore whenever he reminded me who held the money, the influence, the final say. Behind him, Lydia clutched her designer bag like armor, her face stiff with practiced dignity. Claire sat beside her, legs crossed, eyes forward, still convinced she would walk out untouched. I kept my gaze on the table, on the smooth grain of the wood, on the envelope resting beneath my hand. The weight of it grounded me. Inside was the end of their story. Grant's attorney opened with confidence, painting me as an emotional spouse grasping for assets she hadn't earned. He spoke about sacrifice, about provision, about how I had chosen to step away from my career. Every word was carefully selected to make me sound small. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. Silence had always been my strength, now it was my shield. When it was my attorney's turn, he stood slowly, deliberately, and addressed the court. His voice was calm as he explained that new information had been submitted, verified by federal authorities. He placed the envelope on the judge's bench. The sound was soft, but it echoed. Judge Eleanor Green opened it and began to read. At first, her expression was neutral. Then her brow furrowed. She adjusted her glasses and continued. The room held its breath. I watched Grant's confidence waver for the first time as confusion flickered across his face. "What is this?" he demanded. The judge looked up, her voice sharp. "This," she said, "is documentation of an ongoing federal investigation into money laundering, fraud, and misuse of charitable funds." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Agents stepped inside, badges visible. The energy in the room shifted instantly, panic rippling through the gallery like a wave. Claire stood abruptly, stammering something about a mistake. Lydia shouted that her son was being framed. Grant turned toward me, his face no longer controlled, eyes burning with fury and disbelief. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed. I met his gaze, steady and calm. "I know exactly what I've done. I told the truth." The agents approached. Handcuffs clicked. Cameras flashed. Grant's name, once spoken with admiration, was now paired with words like arrest and investigation. Lydia's protests dissolved into noise. Claire sank back into her seat, pale and shaking. Judge Green struck her gavel once, restoring order. "This court is adjourned," she said. "And for the record, justice does not favor arrogance." As Grant was led away, he looked back at me, searching for the obedient wife he'd controlled for years. He didn't find her. He found a woman who had waited, watched, and rewritten the ending. And for the first time since I'd met him, he had no power left to take from me. The noise didn't stop when the courtroom doors closed. It followed Grant out into the world, growing louder with every headline, every flashing camera, every whispered conversation in places he once ruled. His arrest wasn't just news, it was a public unmasking. The man everyone admired had been hollow, and people don't forgive being fooled that deeply. I watched it all from a distance. 3 weeks after the hearing, the house by the river was quiet in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. Not the tense silence that comes from walking on eggshells, but the kind that settles gently around you, like a deep breath after a long sprint. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floors, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. The phone rang once that morning. It was Marlon. "They've seized everything tied to the laundering," he said. "Accounts, properties, shell companies. What's clean and legally yours stays with you. No one's touching it." Justice, delivered in plain language. Grant was being held without bail pending trial. Lydia resigned from the foundation before she was formally removed. Her social circle scattered overnight. It turns out loyalty evaporates quickly when prestige disappears. Claire took a plea deal. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, just closure. She was a cog in a machine that thrived on silence, and the machine had finally ground itself apart. The media tried to reach me. Requests piled up. Interviews. Statements. A chance to tell my side. I declined them all. I'd spent years being used as a symbol, perfect wife, grateful spouse, silent partner. I had no desire to become a headline version of myself. One person did come by that afternoon. Ethan. He stood on the porch longer than necessary, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes uncertain. He looked older somehow, like the truth had aged him overnight. "I didn't know," he said quietly once we Saturday, "about any of it." "I know," I replied. "That was part of the design." He stared out at the river. "He told me you were greedy. That you wanted to ruin him." I smiled softly. People who are afraid of the truth usually rewrite it first. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry I believed him." That was enough. We sat there a while longer, letting the silence do what words couldn't. When he left, he hugged me, not out of obligation, but understanding. It felt like a door opening, not closing. I went back to work a month later. Not quietly, not hidden, but on my own terms. I registered my consulting firm under my own name, the one I'd nearly forgotten how to say out loud. I started small, helping women untangle finances they'd been taught not to question. Teaching them how to read what was really there, not what they were told to see. The work felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. One evening, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. You may have won, but you've made enemies. I deleted it without a second thought. Enemies require fear. I didn't have any left to give. At sunset, I stood on the porch, the river reflecting gold and copper beneath the sky. The same water that once mirrored a life built on illusion now reflected something honest. Steady. Mine. Grant once leaned close and told me I'd never touch his money again. He was right. I didn't need it. I built my own future instead, quiet, unshakable, and free. Some people think revenge is loud, shouting victories, public humiliation, dramatic finales. But the real kind is quieter. It's waking up without fear. It's owning your mornings, your money, your name, and your future. I didn't destroy Grant's life out of anger. I survived it by refusing to stay small. Silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And freedom was always the goal.